Welcome to TCN Talks. The goal of our podcast is to provide concise and relevant information for busy hospice and palliative care leaders and staff. We understand your busy schedules and believe that brevity signals respect. And now, here's our host, Chris Como.
Hello and welcome to TCN Talks. Our guest today is Meridith Elliott Powell. She's a business growth strategist, an award-winning author, and a Hall of Fame speaker, and also just a really good friend. I've had the privilege of knowing Meridith, for probably 10 to 12 years now, and she even was my executive coach at one point in time, and I certainly feel like I'm a product of who I am today, certainly because of Meridith's coaching. So Meridith, welcome. It's so good to have you today.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's start, Meridith. What does our audience need to know about you?
Well, I would say that my passion is helping people turn uncertainty to competitive advantage. I feel that the times that we live in today are really challenging, but we're on the forefront of probably some of the biggest transformation and the biggest success you can have if you're somebody who really embraces it and is willing to go on what is going to be an interesting ride.
Well, Meridith, I'd love maybe even a little bit more. You know, one thing that I don't know if I've ever actually shared this with you, but when you were part of the team at First Citizens Bank, I don't know if you know the impact that that team had on Four Seasons. In fact, I just wrote about this. I'm writing my first book. You inspired me years ago. That's something I need to do. It's one of my big goals this year, and it's called The Anatomy of Leadership. And I was talking in that book about It's a Peter Senge quote. It's not what the vision is, it's what the vision does. And so one of the amazing leaders that you worked for basically cast a vision. Four Seasons said, you could be one of the best hospices in America. And at the time, that was nuts. There's nothing about that vision that made sense. That organization was barely even known in Western North Carolina, much less the state of North Carolina, much less the country. And I had no intention of taking the job at Four Seasons in my job interview. I actually told my wife I was going to brush up on my interviewing skills. And this little program made such an impression on me. And everything about that whole interview process was designed to impress and punch above their weight class. They were only a small hospice at the time, about 25 patients a day, even including hosting the actual interview at First Citizens Bank. And so I just want to pay that forward to you because you were part of that team. You know the dynamic leader I'm talking about, who was on the board of Four Seasons. And I love that thing. It's not what the vision is, it's what the vision does. It changed the trajectory of my life. My kids were raised here now in Western North Carolina. And I think of all the tens of thousands of people that are impacted, the team that we attracted, and they would tell similar stories. So I think that's the beauty of leadership. You throw that pebble in the pond, and you don't know the beautiful impact it'll have on other people's lives. So I just wanted to give you a shout out on that.
Thank you. You know, I think the interesting thing about that, it's funny you would say that because, you know, it's been, I left First Citizens in 2005. And, here we are in 2023. And when I speak from the stage, one of my favorite stories to tell, and one of the biggest that's accepted, that the audience loves, is a story that I tell about that leader and his 5-year-old daughter, who is now working for First Citizens.
Oh my gosh.
So, and I think, when you were saying that, what I think about is leadership is so impactful, but exceptional leadership is subtle. It is, because when I think about him, I think about it was just these little things that he did that forced us all to take a little bit more ownership, responsibility, push out of our comfort zone, that transformed our organization and certainly your organization. But without that subtle leadership, it never would have happened.
Yeah, and that is so profound because, I think we live at a time where maybe the bombastic, the person who's out in front, and more often than not, I mean, when Collins wrote about that level 5 leader in Good to Great, that's what he actually poked on, was that it wasn't that type of leader, the in-your-face, dynamic, charismatic. Sometimes it was much more that quiet, influential, challenge people to be the best version of themselves. Of writing a chapter about that. My new definition of what caring for others looks like. And I've grown up in hospice. We think caring for others is patting people on the head and being nice to them. Actually, caring for others is helping them realize the best version of themselves. And I think leaders like that, it doesn't have to be loud and in your face, but there's something about their presence that wants you to sit up taller. I want to do the best I can for them, change the world, whatever it is. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it really resonates. It's so funny. I was just with a team last week and we were talking about what caring is, because we were talking about difficult conversations. We were talking about feedback. We were talking about accountability. And I think it's so interesting in life that, you don't want your children to live in the basement the rest of your life, right? You don't want to be supporting them at 35. And it's because you love them that you punish them on a Friday night. It's because you love them that you tell them the difference between right and wrong. Well, employees are no different. The only way I'm going to become all I can become is if I'm led by a leader who cares more about me than he or she cares about themselves. And that, I think, is, as leaders, too far. We want to be liked. We want to be, we don't want to do things that make us uncomfortable. If you don't want that, then leadership may not be for you, because you have one job, and that is to produce people around you who are better than you are. You already proved you could do the job, but can you produce 5 people who are better at it than you are? And can your ego handle that?
Wow. I kind of think about the providence of me having been at Four Seasons twice in my career. First time, it's funny, I didn't realize your exact time frame on First Citizens, but I got to Four Seasons in 2002, was here for 2002, 2006. I left, went to the Studer Group for 2 years and came back. But one of the things I will honestly say now, I am a green if you know management by strengths, or sanguine if you know the different temperaments. That temperament wants to be liked. And I can think about my first term, how much that motivation drove my actions. And I'm almost ashamed to admit it now, but I'm old and gray and getting more mature. And I can say, you know what? That was a motivation of mine. But the second time around, I think the providence of coming back to an organization where you have to face up to, who's the idiot who put that in place? Oh, God, that was me. And go, wait a minute, there's a different way to do this. And how will you care for people and lead differently? So, man, you're just right on point with that, Meridith. Well, that's kind of a good segue. We kind of just jumped in right from the get-go. But one of my first questions that I thought about asking you is, you've coached some of the best leaders in America. By the way, I saw this cool email the other day, listed the top 50 speakers in the country. One of my heroes, Tony Robbins, and there was my friend Meredith. I'm like, how cool is that? And so I don't know if most of the folks know. In fact, Meredith, there are very few books that I have on my desk. This is on my desk. I probably thumb through it on a weekly basis and pull some pearls from your book, Thrive. So you've coached some of the best leaders in America. What do you think are some of the greatest learning lessons that I would hope you can pay forward to hospice and palliative care leaders, because those are our listeners for this podcast?
Yeah, I think number one is what we just talked about, is that I think the first shift that a leader's going to make in their mind is that you've proven you can do the job. Like, you wouldn't be in the position if you weren't good at what you do. Your number one job right now is to produce people better than you. You are in the people development business, and your fastest path to growth is through surrounding yourself with really, really amazing people. We think so often that we focus on operational processes and systems. We focus on, patient experience. All those things are important, but the way to drive those is through an incredible culture. I'm really obsessed these days with culture and values. In casting a vision, and really, I think a leader needs to really be able to articulate the vision and get people to buy into the vision. And when I say articulate the vision, you have to talk about the vision all the time. I talk about, in Thrive, I talk about the fact that, and I learned this at First Citizens, just 2% of our population is visionary, 12% is strategic, and the rest of us are tactical thinkers. It's why most of us get stuck in uncertainty. We see an obstacle, and it is all we see. And I say it from the stage a lot. I talk about probably one of the best visionary leaders was Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech. Now think about that. You think about you're dealing with change and uncertainty. These people were fighting for civil rights, something they didn't really believe would ever happen. And far too often the price was too high. And they wanted to give up, understandably. But what he did in that speech was painted what would happen, what he believed could happen if they kept going. And a leader sparks motivation with that. Now, thank God we don't have to be Martin Luther King Jr. We don't have to be that articulate. But as a leader, your job is to help people see what is possible, because that's what sparks motivation, inspiration, tenacity, keep going. You have to reignite their reason to keep going on a regular basis.
Man, that's so good, Meredith. And I think of a great example, and it was dumb luck on my part, but at least paying attention, watching our team. Our team this is our busiest time of the year, and I could kind of sense people's kind of rear ends was dragging. And we had the most beautiful mission moment of one of our hospices, and it's a hospice in Idaho. And the CEO has said to me before, she said, "Chris, I would have quit this 3 years ago, but Teleos has been the wind beneath my wings." It's like we've breathed new life into her passion for this work. So there was this amazing hospice story, one of those beautiful mission moments. I can't tell it on the air because I don't have permission, but it's just one of those moments that you just, this is exactly what this work is about, impacting someone's life at the end of their life in a way that just moves you to tears. And so I actually brought her to our all staff meeting actually last week, and we started our meeting with that and and she ended it to say, "Guys, I was about ready to quit doing this work. My program would no longer exist, and that mission moment wouldn't have happened." And we all walked away from that meeting just like, this is why we're doing this work that we do. And it was just beautiful. It was one of those things I wish was, did I have this grand plan? It was just kind of last moment, this would be very impactful, and just watching how that played out. And I think sometimes as leaders, if it's not perfectly choreographed and, we don't have the perfect PowerPoint, but more often than not, I find as a leader, just those kind of inspirational moments that you put together, they're authentic. Sometimes it'll fuel our team for a couple of years. They're still talking about something like that.
Yeah, people that work for you want to be part of a winning team. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to follow a leader who knows where they're going and where they're headed. And so, understanding that you have got to cast, you've got to cast that vision. The other half of that, I think, is another really important leadership lesson, is how important accountability is. That the people need to be, I think the statistic is 67% of disciplinary issues, over half of the reason you're ticked off at a team member is because they didn't understand what was expected of them, because you weren't clear about this is exactly what you needed. Now, we give everybody a job description, but the problem with a job description is the last line isn't anything else we ask you to do.
Yep. Other duties as assigned.
Exactly. So you come to work every day with a to-do list that's far too long, and you decide what the priorities are. The chances that your team members are choosing the same priorities that you are slim to none. So they do what they think is important or what they're comfortable with, and you're angry because they didn't prioritize the right thing. But at the end of the day, you didn't give them clarity as to how to be successful. I mean, the employees want to be successful, and if they're not, chances are, it's always your fault, because number one, you either didn't give them the direction they need, you didn't give them the skill or the development, or you didn't move them off the team if they're a discipline issue and didn't do the job. So that, that juxtaposition or that balance of, I'm going to motivate you, I'm going to tell you thank you, I'm going to give you a vision, I'm going to remind you of the purpose, I'm going to be that person who tells you you are part of something great. And then if you don't get with the program, I'm going to be the person coming behind you telling what you need to do to get in line and, and make it happen. It's no mystery why the military, why people join a military at little pay with, dangerous positions, massive purpose, massive accountability.
Yeah, that's well said. And I'm reminded years ago when I was working for the Studer Group, I had this very poignant moment that just illustrated what you just said. This was a nationally known person, a very nationally known kind of speaker in our hospice and palliative care space, worked for a hospice program, and her boss was like literally thinking he needed to fire her. And so I facilitated a meeting between that person, those two people, the boss and this other person was nationally known. And basically what happened was this huge aha on the leader's part that they had not articulated what the expectation was of the role. but also that person to go, oh my gosh, you expected something totally different than where I was putting my time and energy. There was these beautiful tears. I mean, it was just like, it was like a Hallmark commercial. It was like perfect. And it just, man, that lesson sunk in so deeply because I saw it right in front of me. Here were two people who I both respected. And it's probably because I both respected them, I knew something was amiss. It makes me wonder how many times there's a misdiagnosis. Well, that person is just, whatever. But the reality is this is the core issue, is they really don't understand clearly what's expected of them, nor do they understand the story that they're a part of.
Yeah, I think that, we have to figure out what the 5 big priorities are in our organization. That if I leave the office every day, I leave, the facility every day, I've done these 5 things, I'll be successful. Then you have people really understanding what is most important. One of my favorite stories you talked about First Citizens, years ago, I had a teller who would never look up and smile at anybody who came into the branch. It made me crazy. I was like, what is wrong? I mean, how could you not know that? I would say something to her when I was in there. Could you not look up? Could you not smile? And one day I sat down, I said, you have to help me. I said, this is just peer to peer. I am not your boss. Why will you not smile? She pulled out her performance review. She said, you grade me on balancing. You grade me on compliance. You grade me on all these things. Nowhere on my performance review does it say I need to smile. And she said, I know you're mad at me, but I'm trying to keep my head above water. And I'm not going to get fired for not smiling to people, but I'm going to get fired if I can't balance my drawer at the end of the day.
Interesting.
And I looked at her and I said, you know what? You're 100% right. I mean, my words are not matching my actions. So, I'd say the biggest leadership lesson in that is if employees are failing, far too often we look to see what's wrong with the employee. Mm-hmm. Over 80% of the time when I work with somebody, it's what's wrong with the leader. Now, that can sound like I'm pointing a finger at the leader, but to me, I found that so empowering. Because if something's wrong with me, it's way easier to fix me than it is to fire an employee, find another employee, train another employee up. If I can understand that I'm holding 80% of those cards, I've got a lot of opportunity to really create an amazing culture.
Yeah, especially thinking about today's work environment, because there are just not going to be enough people in healthcare. When we look at the volume, the silver tsunami coming, it seems like letting that lesson sink in deeply. And maybe in the past it's easier to go, what's the employee, you need to let them go. But it feels like the onus is going to be, there are probably 2 extreme paths, right? You still go the path of they're no longer appropriate, and so you get them off the team. Or the other road less traveled is, oh my God, there's no staff, so we don't even address the issue, which I think that's probably the other extreme. The John Maxwell adage that keeps coming to me as you keep kind of hitting on this, Meridith, is his adage of, if you're leading and no one's following, you're just taking a walk. And that leadership is this art of how do you get everyone pulling in the same direction? And yes, some days it feels like herding cats. Yes, some days it feels like everybody's going in a million different directions. My organization is virtual. I don't have one place I could walk in and see how the team is pulling, but leadership is so necessary.
Yeah, in fact, it's more than it's more necessary than ever. I just read a statistic yesterday. I was doing some research, and it said we are experiencing 200% more disruption than we were 5 years ago.
That feels 200%. So accurate.
Yeah, exactly. And so with that, the only way to get through it is through leadership. Really, I mean, if there was ever a time we needed leaders, it is now that we need leaders.
That's probably a good segue to my next question. And so how can leaders keep the business thriving while working and envisioning what needs to come next in order to thrive? It's almost like, can they walk and chew gum at the same time? It's probably, so can you speak to that?
Yeah, we need to really move into a mode where leaders need to start creating a future-focused workforce. And a future-focused workforce is a workforce that is anticipating change, is predicting change, and is basically implementing change before change is required to happen. The thing about change is we think that we don't know what the change is going to be, and that's fair. But you do know that change is coming. I mean, everybody listening to this pod, you know that. You think
especially
probably
in healthcare.
Yeah, exactly. You know it's coming. So if you know it's coming, you can take a guess at what that's going to be. And having that, I think a job as a leader is to condition their team for change. You got to get them in shape for change. It's kind of like, if you and I watched the news this afternoon and war broke out in Iraq, we would almost be numb to it because we're used to war breaking out in Iraq, right? So it's kind of like if you get your team used to change and constantly changing and in shape, then even when a really big shifts come, they're more ready to do it. And so you gotta, it comes down to that. We've got tools and things that we help you do that with. We're like literally saying, we're going to start to predict the changes that are coming. We're going to ask ourselves, what do we need to be doing now to get ready for those changes that are coming? And what are small things that we can integrate and we can implement so when the bigger shifts come, they don't catch us off guard?
Thank you to our TCN Talks sponsor, Delta Care RX. Delta Care RX is also the title sponsor for our May and November 2023 Leadership Immersion courses. Delta Care RX is primarily known as a national hospice, PBM, and prescription mail order company. Delta Care RX is a premier vendor of TCN and provides not only pharmaceutical care, but also niche software innovations that save their customers time, stress, and money. Thank you, Delta Care RX, for all the great work you do in end-of-life and serious illness care.
That's really good, Meridith, because that gravitational pull, I think often, because many people have not been trained, we still do a pretty paltry job of how we train leaders and what is leadership. Certainly in Telias, we try to remedy that. We spend a ton of time providing leadership training. But the gravitational pull is just the day-to-day crisis du jour. So, and this is why many business books have been written about the life cycle, the bell-shaped curve. And when your business or your industry is on the right side of the curve, it's literally like gravity pulling you down. The business is getting tighter, margins are getting tighter, regulations, etc. So what actions or strategies, like how do you get out of that day-to-day and become more future-oriented, especially when the gravity feels like it's pulling you, oh my God, there's so much stuff coming at us, there's so much stuff happening right now?
Yeah, number one, you've got to create the space for it. So you all have team meetings. And in those team meetings, everybody updates each other on everything that they're doing and those types of things. Take some of that time. Take 20 minutes once a month. Take 20 minutes once a quarter. And start to talk about, what are the changes that we see coming in healthcare? What are the changes we see coming in our community? How are our patients changing? Get your team talking and conversing. Get somebody to take some notes and then literally just say, what are one or two changes that we need to be paying attention to? What are one or two things that we could begin to execute, we could begin to implement on now? In other words, start the conversation and get people thinking. Chris, what this is going to do is the reason that change, people hate it, is it feels driven top down. Think about everybody who works for you. They're sitting there and they're going, what's he going to come in and do next? What's he going to show up and tell us we've got to change? What's going to happen when he goes to that conference or that meeting? And you can't tell them what is going to happen, but the opposite, the best way to decrease fear is to give people action. If I take action, it decreases my fear. And taking action is about getting me involved in the conversation and giving me something to do.
That's really good. You must remember one of our long coaching sessions. I actually got back from a national conference and it was at a staff meeting and the staff said, great, what is he going to have us do now? And that was actually a poignant moment for me to go, okay, they're kind of becoming he came back, what book are we going to read or whatever, and trying to be more methodical with that. Well, two things occur to me now, Meridith, as a question is that we have a C-suite leaders are a lot of our actual customers or listeners of our podcast. So what about the C-suite but just all the leaders? It feels like to do what you're talking about, they've got to invest in themselves some kind of way. And so what do you recommend there?
Yeah, so I do recommend that you get with a council of your peers. I mean, I think more than ever, that's been incredibly important. You need to, there's comfort in knowing that you're not in this slog alone. The second is you need other people's ideas. There probably isn't one problem that you are facing that somebody that you're connected to isn't a little further down the pipe on trying to solve that problem, or at least if you put your heads together, you can work on doing that. So you need to be doing things to educate yourself about how to navigate uncertain times. You need to be doing things to educate yourself about who in your industry is really leading the way. This is a time to get yourself around a pack of people that are smarter, better, and more successful than you are. You should cheer when you are the weakest link in the room. I was just listening to a competitor this morning with something that she does. And I reached out to her and I said, are there some things that we could do together? I'm looking for ways to collaborate with my competitors rather than compete with them, because competition is a waste of energy and time at this moment, a waste. In all honesty, it's going to take everybody in healthcare working together to solve the issues. The enemy is not another palliative care or not another hospice center. The enemy are the shifts coming in the marketplace. And the more that you work together. I'm going to say one thing about that, and then, because the collaboration is so important.
Yep.
I was working in Kansas City last week, and I'm driving down the highway in nowhere, Kansas. And I know that's sort of an oxymoron. It's always nowhere, Kansas, right? But I passed this exit. And as I'm getting close to the exit, there's a great big billboard. And on the billboard is McDonald's, Arby's, Burger King, and one or two others. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because had it just been a McDonald's billboard, I would not have pulled off, because that's not enough enticement. Even though I wanted a McDonald's cup of coffee, that's what I wanted.
Right.
But the very fact that they were all on there together, I thought, well, this is a bigger exit than I'm probably going to see. There's more happening here. I should probably get off on this exit rather than wait to another. Now, the people paying for that advertising had no control over where I went. They were technically advertising their competitor. But I would argue they all get more traffic because they collaborate and go together. And I think as leaders, we need to start thinking that way.
Wow, that's really good, Meridith. And in some respects, I think in some of our past coaching sessions, there probably were some seeds that you planted in my brain. But we believe in collaboration so much; it's in our name, TLES Collaborative Network. And the idea was, how do we pull people together to collaborate in ways that they haven't before, and how do we create a value proposition to add value for them? Which that reminds me, Meridith, one thing I did want to ask you. So you've got a project you're about ready to launch in the hospice and palliative care space, and so with a national partnership for healthcare and hospice innovation, and definitely around this idea of leaders investing in themselves. Can you just say just a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was just shot a video for it yesterday. Really excited. It's the MPHI CEO Roundtable, and it is literally an innovative think tank where leaders are going to get together. They are going to invest in themselves. We're going to walk them through our Thrive system. I have done so much research on uncertainty and why some organizations succeed, what it takes to transform, even when all the obstacles are put out there in front of you. But it's a program that's going to run 10 months. We're going to meet twice in person and the rest of the time virtually. We're going to bring in world-class speakers, but most importantly, we're going to take on some of the biggest challenges that their organizations as well as the industry is facing, and then work on finding the opportunities and solutions. So it's going to be a transformative experience. And, kudos to the leaders willing to invest in themselves. And, Chris, it's funny. Something like this feels like time away from the work, right?
Yeah, where am I going to find time? I've got all these crises I can't even say grace over, right?
Yeah, but if you don't do that, if you don't create that space to do that, you're going to lose. It's the difference between the Kodak, the Blockbuster, and the Netflix. Netflix still found the time to innovate, create, and do business differently. Kodak and Blockbuster did not. It really is. It is that simple. This isn't a choice that leaders think they have the luxury of making anymore.
Meredith, one of your coaching lessons that, as you just said, what you said, and I think that's probably one of many teasers I could give folks of the impact that you had on me. But it was a really difficult year. I think it was about 2012, and we had seen a significant decrease in the number of patients we were serving. And there were some macro business reasons why. And I remember going to our coaching session, and I shared with you, here's why it's occurring. And you said, stop that. Do not give permission for that to be the reality. And I'm thinking, well, you don't understand our business. But that lesson was so profound. So kind of fast forward, I'm maybe a little bit of a slow learner, but in COVID, I paid that lesson forward to our team within Teleas. And so we use the spirit of don't give ourselves permission. Yes, there's a unprecedented challenge, but what can we focus on? Kind of that old Stephen Covey, what's in your sphere of influence, what's out your sphere of influence. And guess what? Most of our members still grew. More people got services at a time when most of hospices in America went backwards. Our worst ones at least held firm. And so I think that that's just one piece of business wisdom. And you pushed my thinking. I think you saw in me that I was rationalizing, and then I was setting that tone in my organization. And then that tone was kind of creating an acceleration to a spiral that was not good for our organization. And so I just want to pay that forward to you. I still pay that lesson forward to many others.
Yeah, I want to comment on that because it's so important. Leaders will give me reasons that they are challenged, that it's not going to work. And to tell you the truth, those reasons are valid. Mm-hmm. They are incredibly valid. I'm dealing with an organization right now, a CEO, that the regulation coming at him, in my opinion, is unfair in that industry. Totally unfair. And I asked him, I said, do you want me to talk to you about why this regulation is unfair? I'll burn an hour talking to you about that. Or do you want to figure out how you're going to navigate this so you come out on top? Because those are two different conversations. And I'm not telling you what you're facing isn't fair. It's wrong. I agree with you. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And I just recently agreed to join an organization, and like in Nothing Flat, they put me on the board. And I didn't realize how much trouble the organization was in until I joined the board. And we actually met and had to make a decision if within the next 6 months, we'd have to shut it down, we'd have to merge it, or we could try to save it. And to try to save it, we would have to do 3 things that no leader in that organization had been able to do in 10 years. We took we decided that we would try to save it, and we would try to do the 3 things. And we radically focused. We said no to everything else and radically focused. And I couldn't believe it. In 6 months, we did everything that no leader had been able to do in 10 years. Now, that is not because we were exceptional leaders. I'm telling you, that is the power of focusing on what you can control. It is mind-boggling.
Yeah, that is so well said. I actually written this recently in a chapter of my book about it's the wisdom of the sphere of influence. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits was the very first leadership book. And that piece of wisdom of focusing on your sphere of influence, and literally don't focus on anything else. But the paradox is, and I'm now old and gray enough, that your sphere of influence grows, and things that you used to think were outside your sphere of influence are now in. So it's start there, and then those things that maybe gave you consternation in the past, guess what? Eventually they will be in your sphere of influence, but you'll have a better platform to actually impact those things. And so I feel like I'm a living lesson of exactly that. So Meredith, any final thoughts?
Just that, I really want people to understand and believe that uncertainty can lead to opportunity. That I realize you're in healthcare, and I realize it is particularly challenging, but you need to not only figure this out for yourself, you need to figure it out for your team, you need to figure it out for your employees, you need to realize that you cannot figure this out on your own, that there is information, there's collaboration, there's cooperation, there's opportunity. But if you dig in, you do the work, you can turn uncertainty into your greatest opportunity.
Awesome, Meredith. Well, thank you for how you continue to give back. Thank you for the difference you've made in my life. I'm always appreciative of you, and can't wait to share you with a lot of my wonderful friends and peers in the hospice and palliative care space through MPHI pretty soon. So I'm going to go ahead and leave our listeners, as always do, with a quote. This one was actually chosen by Meredith, and it says, "Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it, without knowing what's going to happen next. And that's from delicious ambiguity. Thanks for listening to TCN Talks.